All right, we're gonna get started. And as people join us, we will be able to have a great afternoon. Again, with Sean Hartman, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Academic Search Company, a great partner of Campus Compact, and also now benefiting our team. Today is session two of a series, and the workshop for today, as you may have already seen in the invitation, is translating community and civic engagement experience into executive leadership narratives. It's not a congressional title for a bill, but it captures the intent of what this is trying to do. On behalf of Lina Dostilio and I, we welcome again to this session. And please, I know that Sean enjoys also interaction. Don't let him give you a lecture. Please stop, interrupt, ask questions, and he'll be, as always, very helpful in trying to give you answers and ideas. So with that, Sean, you can take it away.
Thanks, Jorge. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. It is good to see so many of you again. We are going to walk through this idea of kind of trying to take some of the vernacular or themes that we may use regularly and try and think about them from a search perspective. I will make the kind of depending on the level that you may need to adjust these things, you may need to a presidential search may be a little bit different than a vice president or a senior vice president search. So I always want to start with a little bit of warning when I have these conversations. I am going to make sweeping generalizations. I'm going to apply this very broadly and absolutely welcome thoughts, insights of your own experiences back. Um, the what I'll kind of talk about for a little bit is kind of my perceptions, having done this now for 11 years, particularly in this space, kind of what I've seen or experienced from running the process side, but absolutely want your lived experience because it's a very different experience as well. So to be able to share. So interrupt at any time, just for a time frame, I think I have about 15 minutes or so, maybe 20, kind of depending on how the conversations go, to kind of walk through some concepts, but leaving the majority of the time at the end to really have the conversation between us of what made sense, what didn't, and absolutely take what you like, and then leave the rest behind. Certainly every search is different. Every search committee is different. If I could figure out what search committees were thinking, I would be doing something very different than this, because everyone is so unique. Whatever the microcosm, whatever the situationship is on the campus is what's played out in these search committees. And so everyone looks different. Every position is different, where it reports, all the conversations we kind of had in the last session about who do you report to, where does it go? And what we want to try and do is provide some common framing to think about how we approach the conversations, really in turning programmatic language and kind of functional language into a competencies-based language then for search committees. And so again, we want to spend some time thinking a little bit about the executive domain. So when we think about executive searches, when we think about executive leadership, there's kind of some common vernacular: strategy, external relations, revenue. Not for some folks, not always the language they use in their work. So we tend to think about, a strategy, institutional priorities, divisional priorities, possibly with an external environment. External relations is a lot of what you all do on an everyday basis, 17 times a day. But we don't always necessarily maybe use that language of external relations. We might talk, and we're going to talk about this in a second, but stakeholder engagement, or we might use some, if I can be blunt, we'll use probably softer words, than maybe some executive searches are looking for in that vernacular. So again, not wanting anyone to change anything about yourself. If you all read the article coming out, there's two professors that really don't like search and took the search process at UVA to task. And one of their big criticisms was publicly available materials for the new president at UVA has changed over time, particularly around the DEI work. And they really looked at, well, why did these change? Well, because probably the office has changed names over this time. And two, how we present ourselves. Now, between us and whoever views the video later, I think it was more kind of a let's pull this out. I mean, it was just natural. The President Beardsley did downgrade some of the DEI language as we have gone from 2017 till now. We have seen an ebb and flow of diversity language, and I have thoughts on that piece, but that's for a separate workshop, not for our discussion. But so again, not asking you to change anything about who you are, what you do, but just trying to put some thoughts in the air to think about the language we use when we go into whatever the next is for you, and how it might proceed, particularly if it's a presidential search. Knowing that search committees on a presidential search have a very different language and speak often than higher education. We are often talking about elected folks. We're talking about business folks. We're talking about donors that don't use often the same language of higher education, let alone civic and community engagement language. And so how do we translate what we're doing, which is all the things they're looking for, into that? Pull this back over here. And I think, so this is my gentle, and I think some people will receive this differently. And so it is gentle. The work you're doing is what I think most search committees are looking for. The work that you're doing, we're going to talk about this in a second here, but this isn't supplemental. And in where I have seen on search committees and leading the process is that I think search committees, if we don't meet the search committee where they are, it can often be viewed as an add-on, a nice to have, particularly knowing that not every institution has a chief engagement officer, or, we don't have those similar titles across. And so translating the work that many of you have and your titles, your positionality, some of the things we talked about last time, is how institutions survive. Like it's not supplemental. It's literally you're doing the work that makes institutions survive, particularly in this time and place. And so we want to make sure we connect,
Sean,
with that. Yeah, Jorge.
if you go back, I don't want to get ahead of yourself here, or ahead of you, I should say. The work you do in democracy efforts, anchor institution theory, community engagement, partnerships, etc. How do you, through the search process, how do you suggest that is verbalized? Because as you just comment, I mean, donor relations, many people don't understand really the makings and the everyday responsibilities that we have in the engagement world out of a university. So what have you seen that helps? Is it this slide? Did I get ahead?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll skip ahead and then we'll come back to some examples.
Okay.
And I think it's the exact right question, Jorge. And it's one that people need to wrestle with. What is the language they feel comfortable for? And how can they represent the most authentic them, knowing that women, candidates of color, also have a different layer on top of this, as well. So what feels comfortable, and how do you represent yourself? And so again, I think what I've tried to do is think about some translations. And some of these may work for you. What you do is going to impact, but you know, lead civic initiatives. It's public mission and strategy. Um, Coordinated coalitions. We tend to use a little bit more of that kind of language. Complex stakeholder and governance. Um, RAND centers and institutes. This is enterprise leader, multi-divisional work. So again, just trying to, that's what we want. And I don't want to be pejorative. I don't want to make this like this isn't a dumbing down. And if you in your core want and need to use this language, then you should. From where I have sat, I think though that it's not that the civic and community engagement is not translated well for search committees. And I think candidates that can translate it well for those search committees, it's not a reduction of what you've done or how you do it, but it's a translation because ultimately your material, as we talked a little bit about, your materials have one purpose: to convince them that they should talk to you more. That's the purpose of the CV and cover letter. If it's kind of a traditional search, your materials need to convince them that there's enough there, you're responding enough to the leadership agenda or to current events that they want to talk to you more and learn more about you. The role of the initial interviews is then to translate your work into, does anybody remember the 3 questions that search committees are always asking? Why you?
Why you? Why us?
Why? Yep. Why you? Why now? Why them? And so on the why us is then translating the language of your work into their work.
Mm-hmm.
The why you is translating, I've done this work and I'm actually really good at it. I just might not call it something else, but this is how it translates for you in the language that you're using. And the goal of that initial conversation, that initial interview then with that search committee traditionally, is to get them to invite you back for the deeper conversation on campus. So materials are talk to you more. The initial interviews are there's enough here that we want to finish this conversation with them. And part of our job then as a candidate is to translate that for them. So, so a little example of this, and again, you need to put language into what makes it feel comfortable for you, right? Like if this feels wordy and too grandiose and too many adjectives for you, that's okay. But it's really translating and valuing the work you do into, so like on this example, it is voter engagement coalition. It could be the community engagement work you've done is about academic research and translating, because again, not everybody just understands. Um, um, and if you walk away with nothing else and you're thinking about a job search or mentoring those that are thinking about the job search is, again, we often think in terms of, because it's where a lot of leaders sit is more at either supervising, providing site insights, but it's more a programmatic language that's often used with your teams. And now what we want to do is translate that into strategy. You're now, looking either for that senior vice president role or you're looking for that presidential role. So thinking about how do we translate that then for them, that we've done this, because almost everybody's done these, what the competencies or what they lay out in their leadership agenda or the preferreds and requireds, you've done the work. We just need to make sure that the people on the receiving end hear what it is you've done and receive it in that way, being authentic to you. So here's a little example. And again, afterwards, we'll send out the slides and stuff to think about And again, here's just kind of two, one's example of a cover letter, some
Yeah.
language you might be able to, um, again, move from programmatic to strategy, because senior roles, the presidential roles, those are those are higher level strategy roles. And thinking about if those are your next steps, then people want to know, how are you going to lead? What have you done?
Mhm.
Um, and as we frame, particularly around these initial interviews, it's, what did you do? So what's the activity? What was the impact? How do you quantify, qualify? Like, it's not just you know, I led the team that, you know, the thing I think I find candidates, the challenge I think candidates have sometimes is the royal we. We did this, or did I do this? And particularly, the research shows us that women tend to use we a lot more than men and I. So it can be, we had a coalition that increased voter participation rates in the county by 25%. The we doesn't get the search committee to know how you led. And I think that's the challenge in translation, is if the language is deferential to we, there is we, you need to demonstrate that you can lead a team, be a part of the team. Absolutely. But if everything comes out we, I don't know how you're going to lead. Usually most semifinalists can do the job. People were selected from a pool, so most semifinalists could do the job. The initial interview tells us how well they may or may not do the job. And then the finalist interview is really nailing down those why you, why now, why them. Now I'll tell you I like the why you, why now, why them, but the second piece of that question that I'm almost getting from almost every search committee is, in how long will you stay and do it? They're evaluating you not just on the why you, why now, why them, but if you think of your own hirings and work you've done over the question in the back of your mind is, do I have to do this search again in 2 years? How am I evaluating folks to know the why you, why now, why them is informing their perception of how long you might stay in that role? Whether it's an SVP, a presidential role, etc. Not just are you prepared and can you do it, but how long are you going to stay? And that goes back to when we talked about mission, fit, and alignment last time, that all feeds into this, to be able to translate the work you've done into language that they'll recognize to evaluate the why you, why now, why them. And so thinking about your answers to those questions, but also framing, what did you do? What was the impact that you had? And then what translates to them? They don't want you to necessarily replicate. That's another challenge I see. Particularly, I just use a recent example where I literally provided this feedback. The candidate, Dean of Business Search, and the candidate talked about creating the executive MBA program. Except they kept talking about it in a frame of an executive MBA. What the candidate didn't know was this institution 3 years earlier had tried an executive MBA, funded it, and it didn't, and it flopped. So instead of pulling back to a strategic view of, I understand, looking at the data, what programs can we offer, managing community, engagement to a level that I can understand what is the community asking for us. Because it wasn't drawn back far enough, because it was focused singularly on the executive MBA, even though we tried to say to the search committee, what skills did he use? What skills did they have? Unfortunately, they got stuck with, well, we don't want an executive MBA. We already tried that and it failed. And so because the conversation wasn't pulled back far enough to say, here's are the skills, gifts, and graces I'm bringing, they got stuck on, we don't need another executive MBA, and just never moved past that. And so again, I think what we're trying to do here is just provide some thoughts, some frameworks to pull back into strategies, executive level management, and to be framing your work that you're prepared to do that and that you've done it. I am convinced that no president should be allowed to be a president unless they've been a residence hall director for 2 years. I am 100%, I share this everywhere. I don't care what you say, 2 years in a residence hall, living on campus, dealing with every department almost on campus, having to deal with crisis. When you want to talk about stakeholder engagement, you've engaged almost every division of student affairs, every division of academic affairs. I don't think you should be allowed to be a president without 2 years in a residence hall. Because I don't, I know that some of our friends from the academic side might challenge me on that, but coming from student affairs, I'll stand on that one for a while. So, um, and again, because one of the things I don't think we do is, and it's late in this, is residence halls direct, like when you want to talk about who knows what's going on campus, the hall directors know because they're talking with all these folks. And again, I'm not saying that other people don't. I don't, I don't want to pigeonhole, but I think the work they do, and I'm biased because I came through that, but we've worked with all the departments. When you want to talk about cross-campus collaboration, wait till the athletics director is saying, why did you write up our student this weekend for being drunk and passed out in the bathroom? Don't they get a pass? Or faculty, can you track down this student? Well, I could, but did you try? No, no, no. I just want to talk to them. Can you send them to me? Well, did you email? Help me. So again, I think kind of those pieces, and it's a minor example of kind of what I think we're talking about here is how do we translate these roles into what they are, knowing that people need to grow into the next level of that. And again, just thinking a little bit about framing, is engagement, external affairs, community, defining what community is, thinking about not just running programs, but initiatives, and just trying to think about it, pull it back a little bit. What is search committees looking for, particularly in a presidential or an SVP role, particularly where you might have board members involved in a search or conversations with board members, into some of that executive language. And again, here's just another way, the framing question of what did I do? What was the impact? What was the strategy? Here's just another example of kind of coming up with your own language around. And again, I think this I led doesn't mean you did it by yourself. It means I led the effort. I led the thinking. Here's what I did. Here's how I brought the team together. Because managing that team is the skill. I mean, that's what we're all looking for in leaders, right? Who brings people together to the table to manage? So it's okay to say, I led the team that implemented this, because you did lead it. I didn't do it alone. I led the team. So I will stop if I can. Okay, thank you because I got during this session, I just got told my mouse was dying, so I hope it's all off. So welcome, thoughts, questions, feedback, which could be you're totally wrong. I've never heard such a ridiculous thing in my life, which I am receptive. I have lots of thoughts and opinions. I don't have all the answers. So welcome your thoughts.
So I'll jump in. I really appreciate the framing of some of the executive leadership competencies that you've outlined. I think part of where I struggle is that there have been times where I feel like I'm probably doing work that's very well suited to translate to a subset of those competencies, but perhaps not all of them, because there is sort of this, domain that I'm in, right? And I'm curious, how do you recommend that we translate our experiences without over bridging, right? Where it feels like it's a little bit hollow or it's a little bit fake, right? An example of this might be revenue generation. So I've done a lot of fundraising, donor stewardship, right? Management of a variety of different kinds of money into the budget. My unit doesn't do a ton of contracting, but I know some of you in this call do, right? Where that might fall short, if I'm trying to make too broad of an assertion that I'm doing revenue generation, that might fall flat. So I'm curious how you recommend that we start to translate in a way that's sort of reasonable and doesn't spread too thin.
Um, I'm a little contrarian on this because again, I have an opinion. So I think there's two things. I think there's one that's a really practical, which is for if you're in the market and looking for another opportunity, spending time with those profiles, or if a search firm's not doing the job descriptions, to really look and see what are they asking for in this, and spend some time doing the mapping to where you are. So I think that's just one practical piece. Just look and see what they're saying they want, and where do you fall on that? I think the other piece is, I think particularly as higher education leaders, we have a tendency to say, I'm deficient, and approach search from a filling in the gaps of our work, instead of leading from a, I'm really stinking good at this. This is what I'm bringing. If that doesn't work for you, that's okay. But these are the skills, gifts, and graces I'm bringing with me. This is how I think it works. This is how I think it fits to what you want. This is how I would do it in your context. This is why I want to do it in your context. But we tend to think about leadership development and search from a deficiency model. And I think it's the wrong approach. And it also creates a level of stress and anxiety for the process, which is, this is what I've got to give. And if it doesn't work, that's okay, which I know is very easy to say on this side of the camera. And I'm not saying you don't need to create some experiences or have a plan to think through those, but I would spend the time on the front end mapping. Here's what I'm really stinking good at, and here's what I'm going to bring, and here's how this is responsive. This is the why me, why now, why you conversation. And I think my perception, again, ask 5 search consultants, you'll get 7 answers. But I think the challenge I see for folks is the deficiencies are actually when they try and stretch too far, instead of just owning it as a challenge. Look, I look forward to growing into this. This is what I think I bring. I bring a strategic mindset. I bring that I'm really good at relationships, that I am really good at budgets, that I am really good at this. I know that I need to grow more into X, but I'm actually really good at doing that. I love the next thing. And while it is the next thing for me, I'm not coming into this, I always use the institutional advancement. We need somebody that's a good fundraiser. Then why do you keep hiring provosts that don't do a lot of fundraising as a president's? Like, if that's so important to you. Now, some of you know I did my dissertation in presidential search. The reason is because we put a whole bunch of institutional people on the search committee. So, but the issue is we're hiring provosts to be presidents that didn't do a lot of fundraising, even though that's one of the 4 leadership things we put in the profile. So those folks have had to say, yeah, I've been around it, but I think I'm really good at it. But here's what I'm going to bring. I understand data. I can be trained. I can, I love relationship building. I love telling our story. I think I'm actually a really good storyteller, and I'm even impassioned when it's about our students. So yeah, I may not know all the ins and outs of advancement, but I'm pretty daggone good. And I'm good on my feet. I'm good on the shorthand, and I'm good at the grab and gab. And I can do it because I want to do it here. I want to advance the mission of this institution by doing this. I have some things to learn, but I'm really good. And it's approach the strength. So again, a little reframing to a little bit more of a strengths model instead of a deficiency model. And we might have talked about this last time, but again, women will tend to only apply to positions if they think they meet 80% of the requirements. Men will apply to the position if they believe they've met 20% of the requirements. We need modulation on both. And so again, I think particularly women, particularly candidates of color, tend to also take themselves out of the race before it even goes, because they self-select out. And again, it is work to put a cover letter and materials together. It is vulnerability to put yourself out there. But we know the only thing I know for certain when I start a search is I'm hiring my goal is to hire the best of the imperfect. Because those candidates, the candidate they're looking for on paper doesn't exist because it's a unicorn. It is a mythical creature, whatever mythical creature you want to use. I use the unicorn analogy. That profile is a unicorn. Maybe we strike gold, but 9.89% of the time, we're looking for the best of the imperfect, which means somebody else is going to have a deficiency in something you're amazing at. The question is, when balanced by the search committee and balanced by the hiring authority, does it equal out that you're the one that answered the why you, why now, why them the best? All right, that was a lecture. That was not a conversation. Sorry, got on my soapbox. Thoughts, reflections. And again, you can tell me I'm nuts and that makes no sense to you.
I really appreciate this. I think it makes a lot. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephanie. I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm struck that while you're focusing on how to use this in search processes, it looks like it would also help with just our roles now and communicating what we do to leadership, especially amidst leadership changes. So you've got me kind of ticking through some ways in our strategic planning or documents and things that we're sharing. How do we update our language, which would get me in the practice of using this language too. So thank you.
I was just going to say, I think this does make a lot of sense. And what it sounds like is, writing for the job you want, that's a step up rather than the job you have. Um, it feels to me like there could be a way to kind of blend the two forms of language. Like, did this strategic thing by running these programs, for example, so that you could still get the meat of the program, particularly depending on the position, for those who do understand those things and where you can then bring in the data as well. It feels like there's a potential for a blend there.
Absolutely. I think people need to make it there. Like, all I'm doing, my hope is the only thing you'll walk away does my framings, and I think it's exactly right. Is my framing going to resonate with the committee that's searching for that position?
Mhm.
And are we comfortable? Because again, I come out of student affairs, so we live in an acronym world, right? And one of the challenges a lot of times is are we translating things in a way that folks understand? Because I agree, I think sometimes it feels like what's disingenuous. This is what I did. If they don't understand that, the flip side being it's the job you do want, right? And so if they're looking for a set of, we can translate that for them. And just again, particularly the thing I remind candidates a lot, nobody's actually paid attention to your victories that much. Like if you're an internal candidate, people don't automatically know what you did. Once you remind them that you did that, they're like, oh yeah, I worked with them on that. They were great at that. I really enjoyed that. They don't recall that on their own. And I think one of the challenges is also we have to claim our victories in a language that translates for a non-higher ed consumer, particularly in presidential searches. So for those that might want to consider presidential searches, I think it's especially true because there's just not familiarity. And I think particularly with the democracy and community engagement work, like if you were moving from from a land grant, from an R1, from an AppLoo, whatever, and you were considering another sector or another size institution, it doesn't translate for a lot of folks. One, you're going to have the bias of, do they know us, right? So if you're moving from a large, if you're moving from a 30,000 student campus, and you want to be president at a 5,000 student campus, well, how would they know? Could they possibly work in our environment? They wouldn't understand what it's like to be resource scarce and have to pitch in and do things themselves, right? Because there's a bias there. They just assume because you were bigger, you had more money, you had more staff, that all the things that you do every day, that's, contradictory to that. And so translating that work into, I do know you. This is why I want to be here. This is the mission. This is, I think about some folks that have gone from large public institutions to small Catholic institutions. You have to make that translation for why you, why now, why them. How are you going from a large, 30,000 student campus to a 3,500 Catholic, faith-based institution? What resonates with you? How do you do that? And we have examples of people doing it all the time very well. But again, they had to translate that. They had to put in the words that particularly a faith-based institution would understand. Chris.
Happy New Year, everyone. And
Happy
yeah,
New
I
Year.
agree, Sean, this is super helpful. You had said in the beginning, or you shared the slide that, just reading here, it's like, our work isn't supplemental, it's actually pretty central to the role of universities. And I know we all believe that. Do you have any recent examples that you could think about where somebody was able to translate it, or how is it nuanced? I mean, maybe connected to a little bit of what Lena was kicking us off with about not kind of stretching that, right, in a way that people roll their eyes, but in a way that seems pretty relevant to the times.
Yeah, probably my statement's a little bit probably broader, Chris, than what you want. But I think particularly around the democracy work, people, when you're looking for the committees might unfortunately have a little bit cynical view of that work, or they downgrade that work into well, you just had voter drives. Like, what did you do? Right. And I think the challenge is particularly on the community engagement stuff. Usually it's not just one or just the other, right? It's a combination of different things, and whatever your office, and also, are you the office of the last resort where all the special programs get, are you the utility player that tends to, oh, well, that's community engagement because one person from outside might walk in. So sure, throw it over in, the community engagement office because they have nothing else to do. Right. And so I think it is breaking down, and I think people have preconceived notions. The problem is you can't solve for what you think their preconceived notions are. You may have a sophisticated consumer, you may not. And so so that's why, and again, I don't want to downplay particularly the democracy work, but I do think it's a little bit of a, in this time and place, it has a connotation to the work. But what is community engagement? It wasn't just meeting with community members. It wasn't having, it was governance. It was getting faculty and staff involved in a research initiative that worked with the hospital system. I think they need those concrete examples of the work you've done in order to translate it. So, you worked with behavioral health to be able to secure internships and secure grant money for a special initiative focused on in the behavioral health sciences, in the behavioral health units of X hospital. What that means is I want to do that with all of our students to provide community impact, provide that opportunity that all of our students are engaged in the community to be able to do this. And so I've been able to do it in this way. And I think I could translate it into to business, to engineering, to other ways that we not only find. So I don't know if that's helpful. And I welcome others that have thoughts on
Yeah, very helpful. Thanks, Sean.
Anybody has any additional input or questions? Well, with that, we have 3 minutes before the end of this session, and I want to thank Sean once again and Caitlin from Campus Comeback for hosting the video meeting. We always learn something, Sean. I wanted to mention that about halfway into your slideshow, when you were basically, don't say this, say this, basically, right? Sometimes the don't say follows the say this. Because again, going back to that point, we are in engagement. We want to give people credit. We want to show that there's a we in higher education. But then that piece, okay, what do you do in the we? And sometimes that's where you go back. Well, I actually created 40 new, service learning opportunities through the center. Or we were able to, generate this many award applications from the faculty across campus. Then you can then give those tangible pieces that you may start with, but that don't tell the entire story.
Yep. I think it's always about, because they want to know what you've done and what you're bringing to they want to know how you're going to lead. Whether it's a senior leadership position or a president, they want to know how you're going to lead. And they want those, I think you're exactly right, Jorge. They want to know how you've led as a predictor of how you're going to lead there. And if you don't claim the leadership mantle, then you've given up the opportunity, and those accomplishments are a little less impactful when it's just we got the 40 new grants. No, I led that. I worked really hard at that. I worked with a team. We all did this together, but no. I did this. I worked really hard to help secure that. And kind of owning, it goes back to leading from strength and owning our victories, which is not terribly intuitive for some of us. We'd like to do more. So happy
Stephanie.
New Year, everybody. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Until next time.
Yep.
Bye.